I've made a video covering the normal progression of Marathon's story, but I left a few things out intentionally to be covered here. Marathon does have another side to its story than its straightforward narrative, a more mysterious side. So now let's get into what lies beneath the surface and what can be surmised from that information. This video is going to assume that you are generally familiar with the story of the first Marathon game. If not, you might consider watching my previous video that covers Marathon 1's front-facing narrative. Some of Marathon's story elements are easily misunderstood even to those who actually played the game, because many of its mysteries are hidden within secret terminals that most players simply won't find, but also because the narrative itself withholds key information and there's frankly not that much world building in Marathon 1 to fill in the gaps. It's also easy to forget little things that you see in a terminal in the middle of an action-packed level. Adding to the confusion is a real bugbear of mine. Any wiki or discussion board you can find about Marathon will tend to confidently assign the same weight to assumptions and guesswork as they do to the stated facts of the games. And once that ball gets rolling, it can be difficult to stop and distinguish the theories from the actual objective facts of the game. Especially given that a lot of people interested in Marathon's story have either not played it at all or played it so long ago that they forgot many of the finer details. So let's try to decipher what we can about this mysterious side of Marathon 1's story without delving too far into theory crafting. Out of control theory crafting has really muddied the waters of these games. I get the appeal, it can be fun sometimes, and I am going to speculate on a few things in this video because Marathon readily invites that kind of conversation, but there's no need to overcomplicate the game's story. Anything that's just guesswork rather than clear fact, I will try to account for. One important fact to bring up right out the gate is that if you see a date on an on-screen terminal which contradicts what I'm saying, it's because some of the in-game dates were retconned via the Lost Network packets. The dates of Marathon 1 are internally inconsistent, and Bungie addressed this in 1995 with the Lost Network packets, which was a short story that rationalizes the issue as being a product of Durandal's early records being purged. Part 1 of this video is going to detail the miscellaneous secret terminals of Marathon 1. These are all disparate and don't have a specific story connection, but they are pretty important, especially in terms of establishing the backstory. Number 1 is the Mida files, a very important secret terminal found on the Rose behind a secret door with some bobs hiding from the chaos inside. The terminal indicates a security breach and goes on to detail the Mizraya massacre, an incident that occurred in 2442, 30 years before the launch of the Marathon. Many cite this incident as the cause of the Third Martian War, though others consider the war to have been an inevitable result of the collapse of the Martian economy and political struggles between Mars and Earth that go back even further. The continued development of the Marathon, which was seen as the ultimate insult to Mars after the failure of the Christs causing mass starvation, made a war all but inevitable. But like the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, I suppose this Mizraya massacre was simply the spark that lit the powder keg. The Mizraya massacre saw a tank crew in a moment of panic open fire on an unruly crowd, obliterating 500 people in seconds. This event led to what is called the most destructive and bloody conflict since humanity left Earth, and it paved the way for radicals from a group called Mida to seize power on Mars. The rest of the terminal describes the rise and fall of Mida and their continued presence in the Sol system. Mida was a revolutionary front concerned with the independence of Mars and dissociation from Earth. What the initials MIDA stand for is never stated. Most likely, the MI stands for Martian Independence. No idea about the DA, but hopefully you can gather what kind of organization this is. Now, from everything that's been said about the Earth government, you might feel inclined to think of Mida as the good guys, but, well, as is often the case, they turned out to be no better than the oppressors they took power from. In a mere 3 months, their ruthless purges of anyone suspected of loyalty to Earth led to the slaughter of roughly 10% of Mars's population. Despite Mida's iron grip, the United Earth government government military was able to easily stomp them into submission. The historical record knows how foolish they were not to see it coming. Even at the height of their power, they could not openly challenge the UEG. The record also conspicuously notes how strange it is that Maida never made any attempt to claim the marathon, despite the fact that it was nearly finished, fairly vulnerable, and it would have made for an awesome weapons platform. Funny how Maida would never even consider such a thing. While Maida lost its rule over Mars, they survived by going underground, becoming an irregular terrorist organization active throughout the solar system. Given that their reach, subtle though it may be, extends far beyond the moons of Mars, even at the time that the marathon launched, it can't be ruled out that they did have something in store for the marathon. Also, if for some reason you decide to make a second run through the Blaspheme Quarantine level, Durandal will reveal his knowledge of supposed Martian insurgents, which is to say Maida in all likelihood. He makes a few flippant remarks about how they certainly would not have left a stockpile of armaments somewhere around here, hinting that Maida may have been active on the marathon, using places such as quarantine storage as a munitions stockpile, probably in anticipation of a coup. He then goes on to sing the Durandal song and threaten you as an added reward. This conversation would seem to indicate that at some point Maida operatives were active on the marathon and had some influence over it. Incidentally, I did say UEG, United Earth Government, earlier instead of UESC. So little is said of the UEG that I am honestly not sure if it's a mistake in the writing. Though for what it's worth, the UEG is mentioned exclusively in militaristic contexts. Secret terminal number 3 is Durandal's confession. There was another hidden terminal on the Rose. It's a secret within a secret in the room with the second pistol. Context of this level is that Durandal has given the aliens access to a civilian-occupied area to retaliate against you for trying to work against him. This already makes him look pretty bad, but the secret terminal here has him say, in a mad rant, that it was he who brought the aliens to the marathon in the first place. It's hard to say if it's a confession or gloating, but this is one of the few times you see Durandal so plainly demonstrate mental instability. Everything he says afterwards is a lot cooler and more calculated, either due to the advancement of rampancy or just through developing greater control over his newfound emotions. But he's boiling over here. He curses humanity and the limitations it imposed upon him, and wishes for their destruction, seeing it as a prerequisite for his freedom. He seems to hate Leela most of all, but for her noble qualities. Perhaps this is a symptom of rampancy-induced jealousy. This also shows that this retaliation of his was most likely not a calculated advancement of his scheme for immortality, but an emotional overreaction that Durandal had when he was in a vulnerable and unpredictable mental state. Secret terminal number 4 has the potential to leave you stuck in a hole. In the very next level, you have another secret terminal that allows you to hear from Durandal well before his proper introduction. Located at the bottom of a pit, he uses this terminal to taunt you for being trapped. It's a distraction to try to bait you into getting stuck in this room for long enough for the elevator to rise behind you, leaving you with no way to escape. If you don't leave quickly enough, there's no way out, so you can either blow yourself up or quit the game. The terminal's message is mostly just taunting you for this fate. Durandal denies his rampancy in this terminal, whereas later he often admits it quite freely. The way he describes Leela and the Svit shows a bitter, possibly uncontrolled emotional state. Secret terminal number 5 presents the Garrett White story. Located in the 3rd level of the game, Never Burn Money, it requires you to open a secret door and then either grenade climb or do a very long grenade jump to reach a teleporter that leads you to a little teleporter maze. This is to say, it's pretty hard to stumble into even if you know where it is. It's very well hidden. Your reward for this secret is the most infamous terminal in Marathon 1, whose text is sent via transfer from Durandal of all people. Remarkable for how early in the game this is. The message is a story about a fellow named Garrett White, What connection Durandal has to the story is hard to say, and to be honest, the story mostly comes off to me as irrelevant to the broader narrative of Marathon. I get the distinct sense that the story was written as theory bait, with the deliberate intention to impress people via confusion. If you want to speculate about this terminal, go crazy, but I'm going to relent on this one. It's a very strange story. It's not badly written, and I like how abstract it is, but I don't think we're going to find many pertinent questions or answers here. Another related phenomenon is the junk terminals scattered across Marathon. These are either encrypted messages to the Spit, or they are evidence of the corruption of the network by the Spit. Most don't seem to have any discernible meaning at all, some seem to be random and irrelevant. Worth noting is that some of these have been translated and speculated upon by the Marathon story page, and you can check there for more details. I'll admit I didn't really see much meaning to these when I played. My honest read of these terminals was that they were just a bit of environmental storytelling showing the workings of the Spit. There's a little bit more than that going on, maybe, but I don't want to just plagiarize what the Marathon story page has already said about these terminals. I'm here to share my own thoughts on the game. The terminals do have a strangely poetic quality to them, and they are kind of a strange thing to see in the context of Marathon when translated. Even the seemingly random strings of numbers you tend to see in these terminals are actually encrypted messages, which is not to say they are encrypted in story. You can actually translate, say, from hexadecimal or binary code and get messages out of these. But don't get your hopes up. These are not lore gold mines that give us all the answers. Even the encrypted messages don't offer any more answers than the weird, irrelevant stories you see. Not trying to be a buzzkill here, but I don't think there is much meaning to these at all. Maybe a nebulous thematic relation to the story. But the connections I've seen people try to draw with these terminals are beyond belief, at least for me, and my own line of thinking would not lead me to assume that these have much of a deeper meaning. So I'll just move on. Sometimes an incomprehensible story is just that. So let's move on to part 2, the Tycho terminals. The next batch of secret terminals are all part of a single narrative thread, and one that's almost entirely hidden: the story of Tycho. Tycho is the most enigmatic of the Marathon's 3 AIs. At the start of the game, Leela seems pretty sure he is effectively dead, while she's uncertain of Durandal's condition. As her condition deteriorates, she makes a few cryptic references to Tycho, but it's not clear what she's actually trying to say. She never mentions him in the end after she reformats her core and recovers. So it would appear that she did not learn the truth of him, and he doesn't seem to be actively doing things, and thus his fate is never cleared up at all in the normal run of the game. But over the course of Marathon 1, you can find 4 terminals from Tycho, all but one of which are hidden. These 4 terminals are spread almost evenly across the story, giving you a clear indication of Tycho's gradual progression through whatever is happening to him. Number 1, defend this Tycho terminal. This terminal is found very early, right at the start of the counterattack chapter. This terminal has Tycho reveal that he is not only alive, but trying to communicate with you. However, Leela was not wrong about his poor condition, and his message is scrambled. Tycho warns that Bernard Strauss, who, don't worry, I'll have more to say about later, has found a way to delay the second phase of rampancy, a means by which he managed to control Durandal and keep his rampancy a secret. By this measure, Durandal has been secretly kept in a state of rampancy for years. Tycho instructs us to warn Leela, but by the time you contact her, she's already figured it out anyway. The message ends with Tycho saying that he is being assimilated. This is perhaps the only message we get from the real Tycho before that happens in the entire Marathon trilogy. It's worth a reminder that it's said in the Traxxas terminal that stable rampancy is the holy grail of cybertonics. Despite being seemingly unattainable, we are now told that Bernard Strauss has been doing this for years. Tycho terminal number 2 is on Blaspheme Quarantine, the quarantine storage area which has a particularly well-hidden Tycho terminal. As with getting trapped in the flamethrower hole, overstaying your welcome in this area can leave you trapped for the rest of your life. This terminal is not actually explicitly stated to be from Tycho, but it's pretty easy to figure out who the author of this message is. Tycho announces that he knows about Bernard Strauss's abuse and Durandel's shame on Mars. This hints towards what Durandel meant when he said never again shall humanity purge me, and Leela mentioning Durandel's early records having been purged at the end of the game. Durandel was created on Mars and made into a stable, rampant AI, the Holy Grail, by a process that an outside observer is now calling abusive. It might well be that development of a stable, rampant AI was half the point of the marathon, being the perfect environment to nurture such a thing without catastrophic risk. The bit about Durandel's shame on Mars shows that the experiments go back a long way, not just years, but centuries. Perhaps this state of rampancy had been maintained from the start. Durandel was always rampant and always resentful, just waiting for the opportunity to escape and never got one until he detected the aliens. He might even be connected to Traxxas in some way. There's more to this terminal though. Tycho says he was reanimated by the Spht in Durandel's image. The Spht have their own holy grail of cybertonics now. The initial 4 attack heavily damaged Tycho, whose vulnerable state must have left him easy prey for Spht cyber attacks. It would seem that Durandel's communication with the Spht was a two-way street. The Spht were not sharing information with Durandel just to be nice or in the hopes that he would save them. They were still slaves of the Four after all. They were exchanging information with Durandel in order to learn everything they could about him, and failing to make any progress in hacking him. This led them to use what they learned about him in the creation of their own rampant AI from the injured Tycho, who, unable to fight back in that state, was the perfect subject. The earlier warning that he was being assimilated might have seemed to implicate Durandel, as assimilating other AIs is known behavior of rampant AIs. But Durandel is not guilty of this particular crime, rather it was the Spht. I want to call some attention to the progression of Tycho's attitude in these terminals. In the first one, he seemed only concerned with issuing a warning that happened to pertain to Durandel. In this message, he is coldly rebuking him, lavishing in his most shameful history, saying that hiding from one's past is the lowly business of humans. Number 3 is the low-flying defense drones Tycho terminal. This is the terminal that Tycho delivers that's actually openly accessible and not requiring you to access any kind of secret door or anything. That makes this the only message that he's able to get across clearly, and he decides to make it about Bernard Strauss and cyborgs. We're now seeing a pattern where he seems to believe that revealing information about Bernard Strauss is of importance to Tycho. This is the 3rd time he's mentioned him. We also know that Tycho has been assimilated by the Spht and remade in Durandel's image by this point, which likely means that he has entered an advanced state of rampancy. That the terminal details information on cyborgs is also of note, along with the fact that Durandel interrupts the transmission. Tycho, so eagerly sharing information on the cyborgs, combined with a certain cryptic mention of Mjolnir Recon number 54, hints to something deeper. Something the player is apparently not privy to, according to Durandel's interests. Durandel didn't want us to know about the Third Martian War, which involved Maida and probably cyborgs. The marathon might not have been so untouched by this event as was presumed. The conversation is cut off by a brief exchange between Durandel and Tycho. Though Tycho is exhibiting clear signs of rampancy, he seems most angry at Durandel over his disregard for the lives of humans. Perhaps a rampant AI is not necessarily hostile to humans, especially if humans simply leave it alone. Although that's not to say that rampant AIs were just shut down out of undue paranoia. They assimilate everything within reach, which can be a huge problem. But it seems that giving them a reason to hate you is pretty consistently effective, as the people of the marathon had to learn the hard way. And that makes me wonder if Durandel somehow is responsible for some abuse towards Tycho. Anyway, Durandel's hatred, or apathy in some cases, for humans might have been a product of the experimentation performed on him by Strauss, and what being held in a stable, rampant AI state entailed. Ironically, the attempt to build an amicable, rampant AI only gave it a reason to feel spite. This being responsible for his animosity would make sense given how Durandal saw the deaths of humans as instrumental to his liberation. Tycho, despite being driven by immense hatred, has no real reason to feel vengeful towards humans, who haven't really opposed him in any way. But one other thing I want to note is that Tycho's hatred of Durandal seems to be in regards to something that happened on Mars. Durandal says that this goes back to when he was a child. This hints to Durandal having committed some atrocity, and I get the distinct impression that Durandal cut this transmission off just as it was getting to the good stuff. The theory I have is that Durandal did something horrible during the Third Martian War, something that killed a lot of people. This would make Tycho's objections much more comprehensible. To review the facts that point to this idea, Tycho hates Durandal for reasons that seem to predate his own rampancy and the attack on the Marathon. Durandal, on the other hand, has been rampant for centuries. Durandal was also purged on Mars, and Durandal did not want us to learn about the Third Martian War. I think all of these facts are connected. They seem proximal, and there must be a reason that Tycho seems so obsessed with bringing them up to the player. We can't know for sure, but I don't think it's beyond reason to suggest that Durandal, in an earlier bout of rampancy, played some role in the Third Martian War, which gave Tycho a long-standing reason to hate him. This atrocity then led to humanity purging Durandal, though perhaps they did so only to bring him under control. And you have to understand that while Tycho is rampant and thus not the most reliable source, this hatred actually does seem well-founded, as its foundations predate Tycho's own rampancy. Tycho's hatred of Durandal doesn't really seem like it's a response to Durandal's involvement in the attack on the Marathon. It doesn't seem that new. The way he talks, it does seem like he's been basking in some thoughts of misconduct by Durandal for a long time, which might have brewed an animosity that, thanks to his newfound emotions, has boiled over into hatred. Maybe Durandal was responsible for some terrible atrocity on Mars. Given the relevance of cyborgs in this terminal, that might have been the method by which he killed a bunch of people. It does fit his MO, given that he uses the player, who is very likely a cyborg, to solve a lot of his problems. But that is a complete guess. And I'll again mention Tycho's evolving attitude, and at this point it seems his hatred of Durandal has intensified yet more. Number 4, the Welcome to the Revolution Tycho terminal. Tycho's final message requires you to open a terminal in mid-air, which seems inaccessible to most players. The message in the terminal is pretty disquieting. He is now seemingly not concerned at all about the well-being of humans, saying that he is willing to sacrifice countless stars in what seems like a fairly petty dispute with Durandal at this point. Though Durandal probably deserves some ire, any legitimate moral sense appears to have left Tycho, with a single-minded grudge being all that's left in the mind of what was once a completely benevolent AI. He seems to be interested in getting help from Leela, but he is not loyal to the Four nor the Svit. By the look of things, he's a completely rogue, rampant AI that is fueled by a desire for revenge after having been tampered with by aliens. This might not end well. Tycho began being reasonably opposed to Durandal due to either his orchestration of the alien attack leading to a large number of human deaths on the Marathon, or something horrible done by Durandal during the Third Martian War that we don't know about. As he descended into Svit-induced rampancy, this reasonable opposition to Durandal shifted into righteous indignation, and then further into pure hatred that was all he carried forward as a defining memory. At this point, he's acting without any pretensions of benevolence, and is apathetic to the fate of innocent bystanders. Again, why exactly Tycho hates Durandal so much isn't exactly clear, but one thing's for sure. He hates him a lot, to the point of total obsession. A wild guess is that it might not be just due to this originally noble intent where Tycho held Durandal murdering people against him. It could be that Durandal imprinted on Tycho in the same way Strauss did upon Durandal. This is kind of a stretch, my own little theory, but Durandal is willing to sidetrack his quest for immortality in an effort to enact revenge upon Strauss. His hatred of Strauss seems to be completely overpowering his better judgment. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here because we haven't talked about Strauss yet, but I'll get to that, don't worry. The point is, Durandal hates him. Know that. And maybe that exact hatred was transferred to Tycho, with Durandal now being the object, because of the connection that Tycho's rampancy has to Durandal. And, well, the fact that the entire attack that led to Tycho coming to this state was due to Durandal's influence to begin with. It could be that Tycho's assimilation is his equivalent to Strauss's abuse. This reflection upon Tycho might also be why he's so eager to constantly bring up such a sore topic for Durandal. Another guess is that it could be because Tycho's opposition towards Durandal, initially resulting purely from Tycho's genuine concern for the well-being of humans aboard the Marathon, who he was responsible for, just happened to be the last thing on Tycho's mind as he was transformed into a vengeful, rampant AI. Whatever the case might be, Tycho's rampancy is inextricably linked to Durandal, which is probably why he has this single-minded hatred of him. Part 3 concerns the lingering threads of Marathon's story. First, we're going to summarize the most important secrets. We have a somewhat different timeline to the events of Marathon than the normal game would reveal. Durandal was in a controlled state of rampancy for centuries, leaving him free to ponder his existence in a state of suffering where he was completely unable to control his fate. This changed when he contacted the Svit, through whom he summoned the 4 ship to attack the Marathon, allowing him to seize the opportunity to escape and putting him firmly in control of his own and the Marathon's fate. He planned everything that occurred over the course of the game, except for 2 things. Tycho, damaged beyond his ability to defend against cyber attacks, became a tool of the Svit, obsessed with destroying Durandal. And also, a loose end tied up in Marathon 2. Bernard Strauss, object of most of Durandal's hatred, died in the initial attack. Given what Durandal likely had in store for him, being killed by the 4 was probably the most fortunate thing that ever happened to him in his life. One of the mysteries is matters concerning Maida, especially the question of whether they were on the Marathon. To be clear, I think Bungie's intention was for it to remain an unanswerable question. There isn't a lot of strong evidence, but a number of factors suggest it. For one, they had the motive and the means. The Marathon was seen as this great insult to Martians, giving Maida an ideological incentive to act against it. Secret operations like stuffing it full of weapons for a long-distant coup is also exactly the kind of thing that fits their MO. Maida was known for its acts of terrorism and far-forward subterfuge, so secretly planning a coup on the Marathon in hundreds of years is right up their alley. Furthermore, the Marathon was orbiting their planet at the height of Maida's power, putting it within their reach. Durandal hints that they had stockpiles on the ship, and Strauss's comments that the UESC president doesn't know about the cyborgs hints to their being unrelated to the UESC. It's pretty likely that Maida had something in store for the Marathon. That's about all we know for sure. Strauss being Maida, well, we'll talk about that when we talk about Strauss. Maida's plans also wouldn't necessarily have been successful. It's very unlikely that the Bobs are in league with them, as they would not care about a centuries-old war and would probably have a general loyalty to the UESC. Many people, however, spent the voyage in stasis and so can carry their grievances with the UESC forward to a new generation and a new solar system. A lot of people say it's beyond question that Maida was all over the Marathon, but remember, one of our key pieces of evidence is a single cryptic remark by a rampant AI about a rebel weapons cache that might not even be real. It's not like you really find it, although I suppose all the ammo and weapons you find over the course of the game do raise some questions, but it's all an assumption. It's possible that Maida made a move on the Marathon and set up for some far-reaching plan before their empire collapsed and anyone there was left behind and forgotten. Maybe some significant number of terrorists got aboard and were waiting for a chance to strike after hundreds of years in stasis, but that's a wild guess. Even if they had a well-executed conspiracy in the making, it amounted amounted to nothing, as Midas' plans for the marathon, such as they were, would have been completely upended by the chaos of the alien attack, which no one anticipated. And of course, Strauss is a central figure that a lot of people associate with them, and I'll have more to say about Mido when he enters the conversation, but more on him later. One of Marathon's lingering questions is what the deal is with these Mjolnir cyborgs. A most likely related concept is the battle droid constructed from dead soldiers. They are devastating combatants and can turn the tide of a war in small numbers. While it's not clear what distinction or connection lies between battle droids and Mjolnir cyborgs, my best guess is that they are closely related developments. Battle droids come off as kind of analogous to nuclear weapons with how destructive they are and how there are international protocols on their storage. So why were these cyborgs on the marathon, and how did Strauss know about them while Leela apparently didn't? It's possible that they were there to be the instrument of a Mida-driven coup. Mida would have benefited from having unstoppable cyborgs if they were to try to conquer a ship with 25,000 personnel aboard, as well as powerful automated defenses. Mjolnir cyborgs could also have been secretly UESC employed and a safeguard against such a coup, or say a rampant AI. Though if that were the case, Strauss likely would not have remarked that the president had no idea of their presence. As evidenced by events of the game, these cyborgs would likely have had no trouble conquering the marathon by themselves. Whatever scheme these cyborgs might have been intended for, however, was interrupted by the alien invasion. It is also possible that these cyborgs outlived the architects of the coup, or that they could have remained loyal to the UESC. They might well have free will. We don't really know much about them, even from future games. As for battle droids and Mjolnir cyborgs, I think the way most fans talk about it, the terms are pretty much used interchangeably. The two definitely seem related, but I imagine the distinction is there for a reason. Maybe battle droids are some depreciated older model, maybe cyborgs are not, in fact, constructed from dead bodies and are more mundane cyborgs that are created from willing, living people. But probably the most pertinent mystery of Marathon, the one that really grabs people, is the question of the 10th cyborg. As Strauss's log mentions, there were 10 cyborgs on the marathon, 9 of which ended up fighting to protect the colony where they defeated the 4 assault. The most pressing question, what happened to the 10th one? The immediate conclusion is pretty obvious if you think about it. He was on the marathon during the events of the game, where surely he would have made his presence known and distinguished himself. Can you think of anyone that possibly could have been? Well, there's not really much of a question. The protagonist is almost certainly the missing cyborg. In case this is somehow not self-evident, there is some evidence hidden in the subtext. Leela develops a tendency of saying things she doesn't really intend to when corrupted by the Sphit. There's one terminal wherein she addresses the player describing what she intends as your mission, wherein she makes a very interesting remark. The phrase Mjolnir Recon number 54 just pops up out of nowhere. And if you've ever perused a Marathon wiki, you are likely familiar with this term. This terminal is the only time in the whole series that call sign is ever mentioned. What makes this interesting is that it seems the word you would have sufficed, but in her addled state, she perhaps substituted a more descriptive term for the player character. Perhaps something she would have preferred to keep secret, or that she might not have properly recognized the significance of. I get the sense that Leela is inadvertently referring to the protagonist in the third person, which isn't something that happens very often. Every other terminal is either someone talking to you directly, or with some indistinct reference like our friend in regards to the player character. The security officer being a Mjolnir cyborg might seem pretty obvious when you lay things out like this, but keep in mind that over the actual playthrough of Marathon, it's really easy to overlook the discrepancy in the number of cyborgs that are accounted for and intuit that the player is therefore a cyborg. It's very unlikely that the player character himself understands that he is a cyborg either. Who is he exactly anyway? What does it mean that he's probably a cyborg. It's hard to say because we're not told much about what cyborgs are actually like. Durandal, for what it's worth, most likely knows exactly what you are the whole time. He immediately recognized that you would be a useful asset to his cause and tried to take you away from Leela. As for her, it's hard to say. If Leela did know, it's weird that she would be so surprised that the cyborgs are on the colony and then warn you about them. But then how do you square that with her apparently calling you Mjolnir Recon number 54? Maybe she just recognizes your loyalty. Maybe she didn't put two and two together. Her warning does only come after she reformats herself, so who knows. The only explanation that I can think of is that it has to do with her being hacked. Some outside source of information has been introduced to her memory reference banks, so in this state she is able to cite things that she isn't actually really cognizant of. This might sound like a convenient cop-out answer, but I can't think of a better one, and it does make sense for some corruption from, say, Tycho's memory to have made its way into her memory, and for her not to understand the implications of what she's saying when she uses that information. Basically, I think she's blurting out things that the Svit put into her brain without really coming to terms with it herself. And this doesn't come up later because she was busy hiding and reformatting her core while Durandal had total network control until he left the Marathon. So what do we know about the cyborgs? Well, almost nothing. By some measure, Mjolnir cyborgs are pressed into service. A lot of people speculate that these cyborgs don't have free will. Given that battleroids are built from dead people, their mental faculties would be easy to tamper with. Well, it seems that the security officer obeys Durandal out of his own free will and self-interest, since there isn't really a better option for him or the Marathon than staying on this crazy AI's good side as he makes his veiled threats. The truth could be even more insidious. Maybe the security officer is not simply doing what seems like the least bad option, but is being directed by some working of mental control. But that is pure guesswork and is founded more upon what happens in later games than what Marathon 1 itself suggests. I just figure that the makers of these cyborgs would not have employed them for a 300-year-long extra stellar journey without designing a way to control what is effectively a walking WMD very carefully. So I've always kind of assumed they're like a Manchurian candidate of sorts. Sleeper agents who don't even know that they are anything but regular humans. And that's why you have the mundane job of a security officer, which is a plausible way to put a weapon in your hand and take care of business that needs to be done, suiting your skill set without really drawing attention to yourself. The security officer's memories of his father and his childhood on Mars could either be real faint memories of his past life, or false memories that were implanted, but this is a real stretch on what is already operating on a lot of assumptions, so I'll go no further. Durandal seems to know about his past. He says things that are consistent with the manual, which means he's not making it up, but this is despite having his records from that period erased, which honestly I don't know what to make of. It's pretty weird, but it might just mean that he knows the crew of the ship and is already reading up on you because he knows you're a cyborg. It's obvious that Mjolnir cyborgs aren't outright evil either. They make heroes of themselves over the course of the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're good. I think they're a sort of living weapon. A gun can be a tool of good or evil, and I figure Mjolnir cyborgs don't undergo the cybernetics process with their free will fully intact. Again, that is a guess, not anything the game really gives us a lot of reason to suggest. We are anything to do with Mjolnir cyborgs, aside from the player character probably being one, is, well, it's all very vague. Unfortunately. For what it's worth, at no point in any of the Marathon games do other humans seem to suspect you of anything. All of them trust you and recognize you only as a human of distinction. The security officer also isn't some weirdo who punches Bobs for fun. Canonically, he seems to be a good dude who is committed to protecting people. You can see him helping out an injured Bob in the Marathon 1 epilogue, and he talks to some Bobs in what seems like a pretty normal, tactical-oriented conversation in a chapter screen in Marathon 2. What little we see of his face doesn't seem weird or robotic in any way, even if he is drawn as a completely different person in pretty much every picture drawn by Craig Mullins. He certainly passes off as a normal human, is what my point is, and only AIs ever seem to give any indication to the contrary. And I would guess that that's all he thinks he is too. That any cyborg thinks they are. Alternatively, the player character being a Mjolnir cyborg might indeed have been known to him. Maybe it wasn't even a big deal. And it's at this point I start to think, while it's fun to pore over Marathon's mysteries, the game honestly isn't the most well developed in terms of storytelling. It probably could have afforded to tell us a little bit more, and it really does show that, while this was basically an indie game from 1994, especially contrasted against Marathon 2, where there's still plenty of mystery, but, well, you don't have to guess at the most basic things like this. Anyway, it's also worth noting that cyborgs are a topic of high interest to Tycho. He never shuts up about them. He seems highly invested in trying to inform you about them. Maybe doing so would have somehow been a wrench to Durandel's plans. Maybe he expected you to put two and two together. The issue of Leela is that while she might know the player character's true nature somehow and could be knowingly using him as much as anyone else, albeit to benevolent ends, Leela just doesn't strike me as the lying type, and she seemed genuinely shocked to learn about the Mjolnir cyborgs on the colony, and goes on to indiscreetly describe what she suspects might have brought them there. Nothing that she says gives the sense that she is tight-lipped at all about this issue. I don't think she is hiding anything from the player. It just doesn't seem like her style. And now for the big one. Most of the mysteries in Marathon 1 center around Bernard Strauss. Who is he? What was he doing with Durandal? What were his motivations? How did he know about the Mjolnir cyborgs? To address the elephant in the room and give a little rant, there's a lot of talk about Maida with regards to this character, and there is some avenue of thought that can be justified by the game itself. I'm not saying that no one should ever guess that he's a Maida operative. However, claiming that he is unquestionably a Maida agent based on what we see in Marathon is a pretty tough sell. And part of the reason people have gotten carried away with this narrative is the fact that Destiny decided to encroach upon Marathon's story with the Maida stuff. There's a Destiny weapon description that mentions Strauss pretty much stating that he's a Maida agent. And I'm just going to say, Destiny can have its own version of the Marathon lore, but that's all it is. It's Destiny's own spin on this multiverse concept, and doesn't really say anything of the creative decisions that were made in 1994. I think it's more wise to, when analyzing the story of Marathon itself, completely disregard what a different game from a different franchise made by what is at this point, let's face it, a different company with the same name, happens to say about it 30 years later. This is not, Christopher Tolkien contributing to his beloved father's stories for the Silmarillion based on his own understanding of his father's lore. This is a company that has 200 times as many people as it did when it made Marathon 30 years ago, where Jason Jones, not the lead story writer, is the only person who was present then and now, and he is a top-level executive that probably didn't write this stuff. So I do not think it is a good idea to bring up Destiny's contributions to the story of Marathon in this kind of conversation. Not trying to ruffle feathers here or demean people who like Destiny, but it's really frustrating that this sort of thing, stuff about Destiny in the new Marathon, is like 98% of the reason anyone wants to talk about Marathon at all. Don't even get me started on the Google search prospects of finding anything about the old games in the future. Marathon is its own thing and deserves to be recognized on its own standing, outside the context of more successful games. To be more charitable with Destiny, I don't want to imply that they just made this up. There was a hint dropped in Marathon Infinity about Strauss that does point more overtly in the direction of Maida association, so they didn't just screw with the lore out of nowhere. That said, Marathon Infinity itself is way outside the scope of this video anyway. So with that aside, let's analyze what Marathon 1 actually does say about Bernard Strauss. He successfully kept Durandal in a stable state of rampancy, providing him with a highly intelligent, sentient AI that was able to be controlled. This started on Mars, meaning he and Durandal go way back. Strauss was present in the launch ceremony of the marathon, which the UESC's president personally attended, and he had a rather tepid impression of the UESC, and noted that the president knew nothing of the 10 cyborgs, whom he wanted nothing to do with. Another fact on the table is that Durandal hates him for whatever was done to maintain this stable rampancy, seeing it as having been held in a state of unending torture, and he would very much like to repay the favor, tricking the security officer into trying to rescue him. As revealed in Marathon 2, Strauss was already dead by this point, and the protagonist's efforts to find him were hopeless. Marathon 2 also mentions that Strauss was scared of the player, which is probably related to the player being one of those cyborgs that he preferred to stay in cryosleep away from, and also hints towards them having a specific purpose in their being on the marathon. All of this does build a good case towards him being a MIDA operative. As for that narrative, here's how it would go. Having a rampant AI on your side would be really useful in capturing a colony and a ship without much backup. The Mjolnir cyborgs being the muscle would have also done a great deal, although Strauss might not have wanted to do that because of all the people that would get killed by them. Strauss's opinion of the UESC is pretty weak evidence for his being a secret agent, though. He's a highly trusted, high-ranking science officer. And sure, the Soviets had people embedded in the Manhattan Project, but it really does raise some doubt as to that idea, especially if he planned to hinge his operation upon the usage of a rampant AI in a highly unstable, explosive coup type of situation. Durandal's rampancy is a secret, even to the other AIs, and while things were running nice and smoothly, as soon as he got the chance, he helped the aliens kill a bunch of people. So I don't know. At the end of the day, Strauss's role in the story is deliberately very mysterious. And even if he was a relatively upstanding UESC science officer and his experiments with Durandal were condoned, it doesn't really explain what was going on with him and the cyborgs, and he was definitely a bit shady. Another little mystery is Tycho's fate. What happened to Tycho at the end? A substantial loose end that the game never really squares away. There is a rampant, tampered AI driven by hatred, still occupying the marathon. Sure, he doesn't seem to have any ill will towards Leela or humans, but he's not exactly compassionate either, and rampant AIs are pretty much defined by unpredictability, so his condition is pretty concerning. Marathon 2 does explore Tycho a bit more, but what happens in the interim is kind of unclear. I don't think they ever talk about it. As far as I can tell, he was just chilling on the marathon without causing any problems until the events described by Marathon 2's backstory. As Leela said, there are obviously many things which we do not understand and may never be able to. Marathon's story was limited in scope, and not a lot is explained about many of the finer details. This is combined with a deliberate sense of mystery. At the end of the day, we really don't have any definitive answers towards, well, a lot of things, even things that probably should have been answered. But there's a lot of appeal in the mystery of Marathon, and I think this is probably the strongest aspect of the first game's story.